Do you think both of these sectors, B2B and B2C, are merging lately because of robust hyper personalization time? For over 2 decades, Rhona Bradshaw has redefined the DNA of global telecom, serving as a powerhouse executive at Virgin Media, Liberty Global, and Comcast. She famously spearheaded the transition of legacy systems into experience led digital businesses, breaking down silos between sales, marketing, and care. Today, Rhona is pivoting the industry by partnering with private equity and founders to translate AI investments into measurable revenue and margin growth. From the Federal Reserve Advisory Council to her latest role as operating advisor for AI led platforms, Rona doesn't just manage platforms. She architects the cultural and structural change necessary for the 21st century enterprise. Let's welcome Rona Bradshaw. Rona,
Right.
we're going to talk about Omni experience. I
Yeah.
have seen a lot of large organizations have legacy systems, and pretty much when it comes to scale, the conversation starts with, okay, let's lift and shift,
Mm.
okay, and do the migration, for example, from on-prem infrastructure to cloud. Okay,
Mhm.
so we moved over to cloud already, and then like we are digitally transformed, and
Mm.
but it doesn't really map correctly to the customer expectations
Mm.
today in the more or less digitally native audiences. Okay, how do you feel about it? Like, why this is not possible for big companies to do the transformation right at first place, so they scale in the momentum of industry is moving right now with AI. I mean, there is a lot going on,
Mm.
and there is a struggle to keep up. What do you think about it, and how can we solve this problem?
It's a really good question. And I think for the most part, it's because companies continue to think independently about the infrastructure upon which they are sat, solving and serving their customers and the experiences that their customers are seeking to have and expect to have. And I think that's in some ways really the reason and the difference between the digital native companies that you see popping up, even like the likes of Netflix all those years ago, compared to the legacy businesses that are still struggling to continue to match what the those kind of companies are able to offer customers. And for the most part, I think it begins with really understanding what kind of experiences are you trying to create in the first instance. When I first started, I always found it to be really important to let experience and technology live simultaneously together so that they could really move at the same speed, but importantly, that they could figure out and learn from each other. Like they're an integral part of making sure that both the experience you create is fit for purpose, but also that the technology that you're using enables that experience to come together in the first instance. And so I think as legacy businesses have been striving to solve the problem of legacy infrastructure, keeping up with
Right,
customer experiences, the
right,
problem starts with the infrastructure is not fit for purpose. The infrastructure won't let us grow. The infrastructure won't let us create personalized expectations. The infrastructure won't allow us to create cohesive, connected conversations. But actually, the infrastructure just doesn't actually quite know what the company is striving to accomplish. And so for me, I've always thought start with what your North Star is. What are you striving to accomplish? What's the end state vision for this business? Whether it's 3 years, 10 years, be as ambitious and inspiring as you can, because I think the more you can challenge how the business operates and the business thinks, the more you are likely to create change that is much more sustainable and one that is much more malleable to the more than likely change and unexpected change that will come down the road, just like AI is having to the world today. And so so as I think about it, it's really about trying to understand that end state and then effectively starting to think about, okay, what kind of technology do we need as opposed to technology for the sake of it?
right. In today's market, when customer experience is a big differentiator in the competition, have you ever come across a situation when there are servers running and you want to migrate uh, big infrastructure to a different data center or to the cloud, and then nobody really knows what's running on those servers, or why we do need services at first place, and then we couldn't make decisions, and then in this case it's like when you move house to a different location, you take the garbage along with that, and then it sits there. And typically, when we move, there are half of the boxes we never open.
Yeah, look, I'm a massive believer in having a dumpster and doing it clear out before you even get started. I think it's the case in my personal life and in my professional life as well. I've always been a big believer of understanding what your landscape is. And I think part of the problem, to your point, is even if you've created an experience that you believe to be differentiating and believe to be what the customer wants, you're doing it in a vacuum because you're not clear on what your starting point is. Many companies, many in the telecom business, many over my whole career have lived off rules, policies, processes that have been created and have evolved over the course of that time frame based upon how the business is operating, based upon the competitors they have, based upon what the customers are telling us. But what businesses don't do well is starting to create an inventory of what that information is and starting to really understand what is where it needs to be. The world of GDPR and privacy here in the US really forced companies to start to take stock of where the data was housed, what the data was, and how the data was being used. And in a lot of ways, that's still very much true for how are we using systems, which systems are benefiting us, which systems are housing data, which systems are interacting with different services. And so whether it's really like whether it's going into the cloud or not, the starting point has to be, do you understand what you're starting from? And just like moving into a house, I firmly believe that there has to be a moment where you essentially cleanse what you've got. You have to ask yourself, okay, do I have, let me lay it all out in front of me. How many policies do I have? Or do I have duplicate policies that I didn't realize? Do I think differently now about how I solve things? Have regulations changed? And starting to clear that out, I think then also starts to allow you to see where you have gaps, which in the most part, as systems are being transformed and services and experiences are being changed, it's the gaps, to your point, that people actually stumble over for the most part versus like having too much of something.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of areas here. Like, for example, you mentioned like duplicate services, duplicate processes. That's a big one. I mean, and that is a perfect example of team silos. Like, different teams kind of use different uh, accounts for the same service, and that's costing money. It's not just a small service. Sometimes there are multiple CRM systems within the organization, and that's like cost heavy. And you touched on GDPR and things like that. I mean, that's a big one. With respect to personalization, I'll cite some reports here. McKinsey says companies that excel at personalization generate 40% more revenue from those activities than average players. Emphasize that integrated personalization is an economic necessity. On the other side, uh, Accenture research shows that 83% of consumers are willing to share their data for a personalized experience, but only if the brand is transparent about how it's used and provides clear and immediate value. So, I mean, we all want relevant information. We don't want like generic anonymous information from the vendors we want to work with. We do need like so that relative information and can make efficient decisions in and save our time. So when we talk about customer experience and personalization, what is your take on like defining customer profiles with respect to the North Star you mentioned? Like customer experience is a big differentiator in today's market, and personalization is a demand of customers as well, and they're willing to trade in with their personal information in return of good experience. So, how to manage customer data and how to design customer data profiles so that uh, we can do it right. And there is a lot of money being drained in this industry.
Yeah, there is a lot of money being drained, and I think in some ways the world of personalization is a bit of a smokescreen. I've been talking and using and creating personalization strategies since the early 2000s, um, with the aim, which has never changed, which is creating a relevant, contextually aware experience for my customers in order for them to either buy more, interact more, stay with me for future experiences, etc. But what we have never figured out is truly what we mean by personalization. And I think The same is true when it comes to customer profiles. Customer profiles is a great tool to create boxes that allow you to generically, to your point, determine segments that you want to kind of focus in on and make sure that the experiences that you are trying to enable are fit for purpose for a broad swath of the consumer universe. That's really important. However, it doesn't mean that by creating customer profiles, you therefore have solved personalization. And I think really what it comes down to is organizations have to hold and house a significant amount of data, but data that is context aware. So we have to have a context hub that allows us to know more about the customers, how they interact, what they're talking about, what they like, what they dislike, all the stuff that would be a typical customer profile. But what a context aware environment allows you to do is then to create experiences that are much more rational and
Right,
much
in
more
context.
targeted based
Yeah,
upon really what's going on
intent,
with the customer in the day and age that they're engaging
intent
with us,
based.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Intent driven, in context,
Yeah.
regardless of the channel, right?
Right,
So
because that's the point of omnichannel. You know,
yeah,
what customers want is they want you to know who they are, offer them services that are relevant to what they're engaging with, offer them what they feel like is a deal based upon their level of engagement with you. They also want you to have some semblance of predictability based upon what they are doing so that you can preempt and make their experiences much more seamless and frictionless at the end of the day. And they want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that you're not leveraging their data for misappropriation.
that's right.
Ultimately, that's what they want. I think what we've all gone down a rabbit hole on is profiling and segmentation and trying to get to, this one-to-one marketing, which it AI is likely to get us there in a much more favorable way because of everything now that large language models can do and actually can be much more specific based upon what customers and just consumers are providing. But I think it's far more appropriate for a business in this future stage, especially if they want to be prepared for AI, considerate of omnichannel, and being able to say that they genuinely are personalizing. If they understand how their data is housed, if they've got then systems that can allow for two-way communication and then can be transitioned and transformed into something that a customer can consume at the end of that I think is far more imperative at the end of the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise, customers pay silo tax because of the company's internal processes are broken.
Right. And companies can't move as fast as they should in making sure that those profiles and segments are kept up to date. And so you end up creating something where, today I might fit in a tech savvy segment as an example, but in 5 years' time, I maybe sit in a different type of segment. But if the company isn't learning and iterating with me along the way, they don't know when I've landed there. And so you're kind of shoehorning people into something that doesn't feel like it's actually very much about offering them more value.
Yeah, personalization, marketing strategy, and segmentation has been very well aligned. It traditionally been into B2B and B2C sectors. It's been seen differently. And do you think both of these sectors, B2B and B2C, are merging lately because of robust hyper personalization time?
I think there is a lot of merging happening when it comes to essentially knowing what we know about the customers and recognizing that the technology upon which any kind of business sits needs to be agnostic of whether it's a B2B business or a B2C business. I think for a long time, we all assumed that you have to have one set of infrastructure for B2B and one set for B2C. And actually, I think what we're all learning quickly now is that really you just have to have an orchestration layer that allows you to know when you're dealing with a different type of customer and therefore have a different type of engagement plan and a different type of I suppose, user interface in order to be able to deal with them because a B2B organization will and cause customer will have a different need than just the Joe soap on the street. However, I do think we all want great customer experience. We do want, a personalized, targeted engagement model. We want to be able to know that the company we're engaging with is preemptive, predictive, etc., and kind of nearly a step ahead of us. And that we have the ability to engage when we want and how we want. That like they're common traits, I think, regardless of what type of consumer you are. I think then as you get into the more detailed, like engaging with the customer on a one-to-one basis, that kind of front end space, I think that's where differences lie because I think corporate organizations have different expectations and needs to a customer like myself. And I think that's where, the world starts to split a bit more. But I think the deep rooted technology and infrastructure and operating rhythms actually can be much more aligned than they have been in the past.
Yeah, customer journey orchestration that you mentioned, the orchestration layer in between,
Yeah.
powerful. That's powerful
Yes.
because you cannot just connect different boxes to create a holistic journey experience. It has to be controlled by a mastermind to to
Yeah.
like and talking to
Yeah.
all services and systems within the ecosystem. Where are customers interacting? What are they doing? And then pumping it back to the analytics
Yeah.
systems, and then it's a real time personalization. It can only be possible through orchestration layer.
Yes.
But how to educate C-suite with all this? I mean, sometimes they don't understand all these languages, and I mean, they only see marketing as a cost center to generate leads, MQLs, and just drive traffic or brand awareness towards the company. But there is a lot more lately on the marketing. It's like the full stack or orchestration of your brand, your customer experience. Customer experience has been seen a different department altogether, but now it is also a responsibility of marketing because customer experience starts the moment customer sees a billboard on the roadside, and that's a
Yeah, I mean,
marketing.
I would argue it's actually everybody's job, whether you're a network engineer or whether you're
Yeah,
somebody in a
yeah,
store, to your point, doing a billboard. I think, just like we have to take customers on a journey with us, I think we have to take a company on a journey with us. And I think that means taking the leadership on a journey of evolution, but one that's grounded in outcomes. I think we have to speak the language of the organization financially. What's the EBITDA that we're trying to hit? What's the margin that we're trying to create? What's the cost to serve that we're trying to reduce? The revenue trying to grow. Like I feel like we tend to talk in quite soft language when it comes to CX and marketing and transformation in general because it's such a powerful cultural change moment. But in doing so, we also forget that businesses have to be a business and have to operate in a certain way. They either have
yeah.
shareholders, they're trying to talk to a board of directors, they're running quarterly reports, they're trying to hit a certain target in a few years time. So I think it's trying to establish, okay, that North Star that I talked about at the beginning, what is it grounded in terms of financial benefit? What's the rigor that you're going to drive off the back of it? And then essentially, how are we going to get to it? And that's where I think the most work has to come into it. And that's why I say we have to bring them on a journey because you require a leadership team that is willing to be advocates, willing to be champions, but also willing to be patient. And I think in order that patience piece is a really difficult one because it's somewhat counterproductive to the financial goal and business. And I think that's where we have to start getting into rather than um, 12 monthly cycles of budgets and long range plans, we get much more into operational planning and operational forecasting, where essentially you can say, okay, in 3 months' time, this is where I need to be based upon my end state. And in 3 months' time, when you track and determine how far you've got, if you've missed your outcomes, well, that means you've got a harder hill to climb over the next 3 months in order to get there, rather than reforecasting and pushing the timeline out at the end. I feel we've got to get back into a better space where everybody's held in a much more tighter operating position to say the outcomes aren't changing, the goalposts aren't moving. In 3 years' time, we have to hit the following numbers. And in order to get there, we've got to track very, very closely. We've got to measure. And then as we come close to hitting targets or missing targets, then challenges have to then start to be reinvented. And you have to say, okay, well, I still got to get there in 3 years' time. So what do I need to do differently? How do I need to challenge things differently? Is there more funding required? Is there a different way of solving the problem required? And bringing everybody on the journey means having them all around the table so that you're actually debating those challenges at the same time. And I think that's the hardest part because I feel in especially in CX in the world of CX and digital transformation as it has been, it's always kind of been held off to the side, and there's always been a lot of talk about integrating deep into the organization, hub and spoke models versus separate silos. But really, ultimately, what you need a governance group that is not willing to change and then not willing to come away from the targets or the outcomes that have been put in place. And by having that, how you achieve it can continue to change and should based upon everything you learn along the way. What you're going to achieve should always remain in place. And I think that creates a different kind of pull that maybe drives a much more positive and much more successful outcome.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to digest here. But do you think like leaders should also need to learn what's the new industry looks like?
I mean, everybody should be learning, but yes, I mean, look, if you're a leader and you're not learning and you're not educating yourself, then you shouldn't be a leader. That's the reality of it. And if you're not interested, then maybe it's come time to move on. Everybody has to learn and everybody has to be willing to figure out why this is different and how it's what needs to change. I think the challenge though is everything is so busy. How do you create the space and the time? And that's where people like myself and others um at the roles that I've done, that was our jobs to make sure that you kept it top of mind, found ways of constantly educating so that you had a personal pull by wanting to know more, but you also had somebody kind of constantly filling your cup up with more information all the time. But yes, I 100% agree with you. Don't like knowledge is power and we should always be continuing to learn. We will never not need to learn what's coming next.
AI is actually confusing everybody,
Mhm.
especially on the leadership side, because what I have learned talking from different leaders is like they see, and it's not just my observation, also have seen data saying it, like leaders think it's technical people's job to
Mhm.
learn and implement AI.
Yeah.
Okay, there is a knowledge gap.
Yeah.
Why they, I mean, just using ChatGPT or Gemini account, having a Claude login is not AI transformation. There is a lot that AI can do, and there is an education gap between leaders, and that is also triggering to an alignment gap, like what company can do with AI uh, today or tomorrow, uh, future ready. And like, first of all, do you agree with this?
I mean, look, it goes all the way back to your first kind of question and comments, right? AI is a fundamental change to the way in which we do business. It's not just a technical change. It's not just a platform. It requires everything to change. I mean, look, when I was leading digital transformation, eh, you know, it was always there was always maybe an option assigned to it. Like, yeah, we could change this policy, but is there another workaround that we could do to maybe make it self-serviceable? With AI, there's no workaround. You have to really stare at what your starting point is. You have to stare at what needs to change and you actually have to apply it to make sure that it does change. And I think that's the challenge across the board. It's culturally, how are people going to do things differently? How will people work? But also, like, what is the infrastructure? Is it fit for purpose? Is it actually going to be able to solve not just what we need now, but in 3 to 5 years' time? The omni-channel comment, like what is omni-channel these days? We've gone from, one channel to plethora of channels, and infrastructure has to be able to be flexible enough to just adjust to whatever those new channels are. Personalization has to constantly adjust. And so it all stems back to knowing what you're striving to accomplish, but also it stems back to making sure that you're, as a business, ready to fundamentally change.
Right. And I call it fear factor in the C suite. I mean, and that's acronym for FEAR, like F as in FOMO, of
Mm,
course. Like we all want to speed up on AI
yeah.
transformation and bring in results, and we want to look cool with
Mhm.
AI,
Yeah.
right? And E as an education gap, we don't know what we
Mhm.
don't know versus what we don't even know what AI can do for us. And
Yeah.
sometimes we know things, but just like
Yeah.
keep thinking about it. And then an alignment gap, what we already know, how to translate that into results and
Yeah.
business outcomes,
Yeah.
right? And then last one is the roadmap void.
Yeah.
uh, Means like how to get out of pilot purgatory and
Mhm.
scale with AI. That's another thing like leaders are missing to understand. And in terms of digital maturity on the C-suite leadership, and you work very closely in the C-suite with boards, what do you think the right start, or what is the starting point to fill all these gaps in the leadership so that like strategies are done right and implementation is done
Yeah.
quickly?
God, it's a hard question and a long answer. I look, commitment is super important to your like fear point. You can't have FOMO if you're not willing to commit to figure
Mm.
out therefore how you can leverage, what the new thing is and then run at it and differentiate against it and use it to compete. And I think in a lot of cases that commitment is grounded in a lack of understanding, to your point, but also a fear of the regulations that are coming around the corner and a fear of what we don't know. And so there's a lot of hedging that I think is taking place because it's kind of like, let's see what so and so does. Let's see what happens, with everything that's going on with, OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever it might be, in order to nearly create a safety net that kind of allows the risk to be minimalized. And the reality with AI is that we got to jump. And if you're gonna jump, you need commitment. You need the ability, you need trust across the board that effectively you're going to jump without ramifications of, you know, landing in the wrong place or whatever it might be. You need to be able to continuously iterate. You need to be able to continuously talk about what's happening. So communications is super
Yeah,
important to the whole
yeah,
conversation. I think, in the C-suite and certainly at a leadership perspective, there is 100% a fear of FOMO because competition is rife and it's important to differentiate. And the reality is, back to my financial point earlier, like there are financial outcomes to achieve. But if you don't know where you're going, so if you don't know what your end state is and you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, then AI becomes a solution without a problem. And if you don't know what
that's
that
another thing.
problem is, you're going
Yeah,
to continue to spin. You're going to make different choices. You're going to spin every time somebody new comes along. So for me, my conversations with the companies that I'm currently advising are very much about like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And what is the solution to that problem? And how easy is it to bring those two things together? And when you're engaging with customers, vendors, partners, whomever it might be, you kind of have to be able to understand what are the problems that they're equally seeking to solve for and how does your solution fit into theirs, as opposed to everybody thinking that there's this great AI solution, overnight it's going to be solved and we're all going to win. Like I've done large scale transformation and integrations over the years, and it's not just enough to say let's build this experience differently and let's use this new platform. It's, well, what's the reason why we've got this experience in the first instance? What's not working? What is working? How does it flow through? What's the friction associated with it? Is it a problem that the customers are having? How do I have to change the training and education of the people I'm engaging with in order to be able to do their jobs more effectively? How do you continue to keep it flowing? So I think it's really about trying to figure out, what is your problem? What is this, solution? And then how do those two things come together? Because actually if you can really ground yourself in that, I think you start to be able to have that commitment to that end state, and it becomes easier to communicate and keep evolving throughout the time period in order to get to that end state at the end of the day.
that's cool. You mentioned you have managed large scale transformations, and I know, and I have seen you since you were with Comcast for a few years, and I've been watching your work.
Thank you.
What suggestion that you can give to other executives in this AI era for marketers,
Uh,
that what are those low hanging fruits in the AI transformation that marketers can follow for quick win? What are use cases, in other words, that you can suggest?
Yeah, I think you know more about the problems that your customers are having than maybe you let on or realize at the end of the day. And so getting deep knowledge into the fallout that's occurring in terms of your experiences. Coming from my old world, it would have been, why are customers having to call a call center? Why do they have to engage with a chatbot? Do they have to go into a retail store? What are the reasons for that engagement? Because all that does, if it's not deliberately set up in that way, it causes customers not to trust the experience that they're having. It causes customers to second guess the experiences they're having, and it stops them from engaging with alternative methods that are maybe much more time efficient for themselves and cost efficient for the business. And so starting there allows you to see, oh, that maybe the use case that I had considered playing with is actually not as problematic as it looks like. And maybe I should take a different tact and go down a different path. So grounding yourself in what the problems are based upon the data is a really good position to come from, because suddenly you start to see kind of what the customers are seeing and maybe see a little bit more transparently than maybe what you are thinking based upon, what you think people should be going after or what you think is the kind of low hanging fruit. I think, secondly, finding ways to engage with your technology team is super important. I have never operated in any of my roles without technology right beside me, making sure that they are part of the conversation and part of the problem. And then at the other side, making sure that finance are part of the conversation and part of the problem. Because effectively that kind of trifecta of finance, CX, and technology is a pretty special trifecta if you can get it together, because suddenly you're moving all together in the same direction. You're identifying what your problems are. Finance are helping you create the ROI and identifying where the benefit to the business is. And technology is equally identifying maybe what changes they can make to the middleware, the APIs, the infrastructure, whatever it might be, in order for quick wins to occur that maybe don't require massive large scale transformation or large scale change, and it allows you to then start to think about, okay, actually, I can pivot and go into a different direction.
Right. Yeah, and you're spot on. And with IDC's research as well, uh, what they say is like digitally resilient organizations, those with integrated modern infrastructures, respond to market disruptions 50% faster and see significantly higher revenue growth during downturns. So it is very well aligned with your approach to identify the problem, define it, look at your data, what you have, and then have technology team support infrastructure
Yeah.
to execute that and then run it for results.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great. Data has been a challenge with AI as well. I mean, AI is also seen as like garbage in, garbage out analogy, right? So if you feed in wrong data, you give wrong prompt, it's gonna give you garbage. Or without you even knowing, you can make decisions based on that, and that could end up being inefficient decisions. Then and many leaders keep thinking about cleaning data, organizing it first, fix the data first, and then it also delays the whole transformation. And every
Mhm.
week there are new models being launched, every day
Yeah.
new products are coming into the market, and again it's a delay. So
Mhm.
how to fix data in this case, or like how can data be fixed alongside while we are making progress with AI transformation?
First of all, I think it has to be. I mean, I always believe that sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. Like, the reality with AI and the changes that are happening with AI, we're going to live in a world for the next 10 years
Yes.
where every week something new is going to come out, and every week somebody's going to be left behind.
It's
And so
only going to get faster, I
it is
think.
only getting faster. And so, in some ways, I think companies that are choosing to, again, go back to the dumpster and the cleanse conversation earlier, companies that are choosing to clean up their foundations, their infrastructure, their data, and make it as a priority are going to be the ones that I think take full advantage of what AI can offer over the course of the next kind of 5, 10 years. And I believe that because, to that point, LLMs continue to move like a rate of knots. Garbage in, garbage out. Everybody is learning. Like Claude, ChatGPT, what it can do today versus what it could do 3 months ago, totally different situation. And I think, again, if you keep an eye on the prize, then taking some time to make sure that your data is in good shape whilst you pilot some things on one side, whilst you maybe identify some quick wins on some other sides, while you maybe put in place some really good governance and thought leadership environments so that people are constantly learning and keeping an eye on what's changing externally. If you can keep an eye on what you've got to do internally, cleaning up that data, making sure you've got a context hub where people can actually where you're constantly rotating what you're learning about your customer, even
Right.
if it takes you 6 months longer than somebody who has implemented straight away something new from an AI perspective. I believe the company that has taken the time to clean and cleanse is the company that's gonna win at the end of the day, because to your earlier stat that you just called out, that modern infrastructure requires flexibility and the ability to evolve quickly.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
can't evolve quickly if any part of your infrastructure is aligned with tech debt, is completely disconnected, and where your data is not set up in a way to be able to learn. If you want an orchestration level layer, you're going to have to clean that up in the first instance. And I think that's a really hard conversation to have with the C-suite, because essentially everybody wants to move so fast and people see slowness as a loss, or you're letting a competitor get away. And actually my personal belief is that actually you're actually going to overtake them at like the third, fourth bend, because you like take a Formula One analogy, like you changed your wheels. It started to rain, you've just changed your wheels, you're gone. As opposed to somebody who's going to keep who decided to go out in the hards at the very beginning, and they're going and they're not going to have any kind of pit stop. I do believe that you have to take the time to figure that out and just recognize that AI is going to keep moving and you're not going to keep up with it. So actually you'd be better off to make sure that your data, your world, your infrastructure can feed into the latest and greatest, because that's what's going to evolve at the same time. That's going to become a lot more impactful.
And AI can even help cleaning data also. It can help you clean data also. You use agents and analyze your data and have recommendations. You can do it much faster than we can do otherwise. So let's move to my next and the last topic for today, about budget, marketing budget. As I mentioned, like marketing is seen as a cost center, and when it comes to reducing cost, infrastructure today for AI needs a lot of money to spend on, and focus is right there for transformation and keep going. And whenever there is a decision to budget cut, marketing is seen as a first target. I mean, alongside layoffs and all those things. But how marketing leaders can protect the budget? Because if there is cost is reduced, of course, the quality and results are going to get impacted.
Mhm.
So, what is your approach? First, how to protect the budget if it is get cut? Then how to
Mhm.
shift priorities in a way that we keep generating good results?
Well, first of all, I think marketing tends to get caught up in a lot of traditional ways of doing things. And so I think in a lot of cases, there's a lot of noise in the budgets in the first instance. And I don't think a lot of measurements and marketing measurements have kept up with really making sure that they're tied to the bottom line. And so I think they end up being like an easy target, quite frankly. Any of the marketing teams that I have been lucky enough to work with have always tried to connect the work they're doing to the bottom line from a business perspective. That's where the value comes in. And so I think first and foremost, the more a marketing organization can leverage the MarTech infrastructure that's now really, second to none in terms of what's available these days, but tie it directly to, a cost to acquire or a cost to serve, and really allow finance to see the thread from the ad that you've purchased all the way through. I think you start to be in a much more stronger position to be able to fight for your budget because effectively then people can see where the money's going and how it's then impacting. I think secondly, I think marketing budgets, you know, in my opinion, don't certainly in on the media side, don't need to be as large as they used to be because of the amazing evolution of programmatic and the world that is now kind of really coming through from a digital marketing perspective, whether it's all the work you're seeing with SEO and paid search or all the work that you're seeing through social media networks and the algorithms that are coming through. I think there is a lot more data and a lot more technology inferring who people are, where you should spend your money, and what you should do versus their traditional marketing and media that people had been spending previously. Which means I think you can get a lot more bang for your buck than necessarily spending it on traditional media. And I think if you can really start to connect those two worlds together, I think marketing budgets start to get a lot more protected because effectively it's not just marketing for the sake of marketing, it's not just media for the sake of media. It's actually saying, this ad that I positioned on this social network actually drove the following sales. That's hugely beneficial at the end of the day versus I put an ad on the TV and I saw some demand get generated, but actually I don't know whether anything came off the back of it. And so the more I think marketing organizations and agencies and um, ultimately data scientists can kind of merge and start to figure out how to become a lot more relevant with the data they use and connected to the financial pieces. I think there's going to be a lot less conversations about, hey, let's reduce that marketing budget because effectively people can see the value.
So typically, it gets down to clear mapping between activities to
Yeah.
outcome to profit and loss statement.
Yeah. Like, when I was we were trying to reduce cost to serve in one of my previous roles, we got as far as a a call comes in and we are gonna take that actual call directly out, and that customer is not gonna call again because that customer is gonna self-serve from here on out, and we can track and see how that customer comes back into the loop and whether that's a fail or whether that's a positive. That's where marketing needs to really start to get to because if you can directly connect it, then the value chain always remains constant. And therefore, every dollar in is very clear on the dollar that came out at the same time.
Yeah, and if budget is cut forcefully, right, which happens, how to define priorities and like how to still deliver more with less.
I think it still comes back to lining up against that North Star and that end state vision at the end of the day. Personalization to our earlier conversation doesn't mean needing to throw a net really as wide as you had to do previously. It comes down to being very specific about the audience that you're trying to focus in on, the segments that you're trying to generate, the outcomes that you want off the end at the end of the day, and ultimately the people that you're not going to talk to. And that sometimes is the hardest part because you feel if I don't talk to them, then like they'll go somewhere else. But creating maybe more of a roadmap, framework, etc., that allows you to say, okay, I can't spend my money on five segments. I've got to spend it on one. Who's my major priority here? Let me fixate on what I'm doing with that group. And then let me see how I generate and then maybe move through that in a phased approach over the course of time. Prioritization is the hardest thing that anybody has to do, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in technology, whether you're in CX. Nobody likes it because effectively it forces you to say, what's number one on my list? But the minute you put a number one on the top of the list, somebody goes, but what about number two? And what about number 10? And isn't number 12 more important? So
They're all competing. Yeah.
everybody just is competing to get their work done. If you can generate an environment where everybody is focused on the same goal, and you all know what you're trying to accomplish and everybody's work is tied to the success of that goal and the enablement of that goal, I think prioritization becomes a lot easier. Budget debates become a lot easier because essentially you say, okay, well, what is the most important thing? If we can only do one thing that will keep us going on our path to achieving our end state goal, then let's go and get that done. When you remove the competition internally and the kind of um fluid prioritization, I think you actually start to maintain the cohesiveness of the organization, but you equally also keep moving forward in the in the direction that you need to go in versus losing sight of it altogether.
So North Star is the key, and that North Star should be same for the entire organization,
Yes. Yeah.
or at least department for marketing at least, right?
I
So it
think it
should
should
be
be for the whole organization, and then I think each department has to come at it from a different angle for sure, based on what they need to do. But it's always making sure that it's connected back up to it. Like if we all need have that same destination in sight, then we're all going to get to that same destination in some way or another. Yeah.
that's right. So what is your favorite metric when you go into review meetings, and what is that first thing you want to learn from the team?
Usually it's a revenue number because I want to know what revenue was generated by the work that was happening. Mostly because I think it's the start of any good conversation. I think
And
if
that's
you
the
can,
fuel of the organization also.
yeah, I think if you can understand what revenue is being generated, you get a really good understanding of the type of conversation that's going to come after that. Like, is it a positive? Is it a negative
Mm.
conversation? I think it gives you a good lay of the land. um and then personally, I like to see people uh like proportionately staying within kind of self-service environments or um like moving through omnichannel environments. And I think metrics like those are constantly evolving, and there's some great work happening in many companies around like the evolution of NPS, the evolution of customer effort scores, really trying to think about like when you think about a customer, they just don't engage with one channel, they engage with many, many channels, and how you define that as well. So I think actually, if anything, I think AI is going to unlock massive opportunity for how we determine success and how we define success. And I think the more we can be open-minded to that, I think the bigger the opportunities kind of will be presented, because that's where you start to see where the opportunity lies.
Exactly.
Mm.
Well, great conversation, Rona. Great
Thank you for
insights,
having
and
me.
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for
Appreciated
your
it.
time. Yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nev.
And that's a wrap on this episode. We hope you are walking away with at least one battle tested strategy you can apply to your own digital journey today. This show is built for leaders like you who are tired of the fluff and ready for real solutions. If you found value in this discussion today, please subscribe to the channel and leave us a review. It helps us bring more world class leaders to the table. Also, feel free to share this episode with a colleague who is navigating these same digital trenches. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.